Some voices aren't heard, they are felt. And when she spoke, even the silence in him trembled. Cole Arden had spent years believing the universe had already taken everything it could from him. His ranch sat on the edge of the barren frontier, where the red dust never settled and the stars at night looked more like wounds than light. He lived alone with the quiet rhythm of the machines that kept his livestock alive, his days bleeding into one another like pages of the same story. But that evening, something fell from the sky, something that screamed louder than thunder and burned longer than the setting sun. He rode out on instinct, the old hoverbike kicking up trails of dust behind him. Where the impact had torn the desert open, he found a small pod, half buried, still hissing from the heat of re-entry. The air around it shimmered with static, the scent of ozone sharp and unfamiliar. For a moment, he thought it was military debris, maybe one of the old orbital drones finally falling out of the sky. Then the hatch cracked open, and she crawled out. Her skin was the color of twilight, blue with faint luminescent lines that pulsed weakly along her arms. Her silver hair clung to her face, tangled with sand. When her eyes met his, he forgot to breathe. They weren't human eyes. They held a depth that made him feel like he was being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. She staggered, clutching her chest, and then dropped to her knees in the sand before him. "Human, please," she gasped, her voice trembling like a broken song. "I can't survive alone." The words hit him harder than the crash. No one had spoken to him like that in a long time. No fear, no demand, just the raw truth of desperation. Cole dismounted, keeping one hand near his weapon, the other steady at his side. He scanned the horizon. Nothing but wind and ruin. She was alone. Her breathing was shallow. The heat was killing her faster than shock. He knelt beside her and noticed the cracks on her skin, faint but widening, like glass under pressure. "You're hurt," he muttered. She shook her head, whispering, "Air, wrong air." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed to walk away. The war between humans and her kind had ended only 5 years ago, and people still spat the word alien like it was poison. But something about her, the way she tried to hold her head high even as her body failed her, stirred something long buried in him. He pulled off his oxygen breather and placed it over her mouth. She resisted at first, confused, then took one deep, trembling breath. Her chest rose sharply and color returned to her cheeks. When her eyes opened again, there was a question in them, a silent one he didn't know how to answer. He said quietly, "You'll die out here if I leave you." Her lips parted, a faint, broken smile forming. "Then don't leave me." He froze, the words echoed in him, dragging out a memory he'd spent years burying. His wife's voice, soft and fading on her last night. "Don't shut the world out, Cole. Don't become another ghost in the dust." He lifted the girl, she weighed almost nothing, and carried her to his hoverbike. Her skin was cold despite the heat, her pulse fragile but steady. He wrapped her in his coat and started the engine. The desert wind screamed around them, carrying sand and smoke and the faint sound of something like a heartbeat that wasn't his. Back at the ranch, he laid her on the old cot near the hearth. The glow of the furnace painted her in flickering amber light. She looked almost human in that glow, fragile, frightened, yet beautiful in a way that made him uncomfortable. He fetched his emergency med kit, unsure what would work on her physiology, and did what he could. Cleaned the wounds, wrapped the burns, watched her breathe. Hours passed. Outside, the desert fell silent. Inside, the machines hummed, and the sound of her slow, uneven breathing filled the space between them. Cole sat across from her, elbows on his knees, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She stirred, eyes fluttering open again. "Where am I?" "Nowhere good," he said. "You crashed outside my property. You're lucky I found you before the scavengers did." Her gaze wandered around the small cabin, taking in the simple tools, the walls made of old ship metal, the quiet order of a man who lived alone too long. "You are human?" she asked softly. He nodded. "And you're not." She smiled faintly. "I used to think humans were all monsters." He let out a dry laugh. "Most days I'd agree with you." Silence stretched between them again. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. She touched the breather still resting near her, tracing its edge. "You gave me this." You could have let me die. Could have, he said simply. Why didn't you? He looked at her for a long time, his jaw tightening. Because I've seen enough dying to last a lifetime. Something softened in her eyes. She reached out slightly as if to touch his hand, then stopped herself. My name is Arinya. He hesitated, then replied, Cole. Thank you, Cole. He nodded once and stood, breaking the fragile connection. You need rest. I'll figure out how to get you more air filters by morning. When he turned to leave, her voice stopped him again, quieter, trembling, but clear. I don't want to be alone. He didn't look back. Neither do I, he said under his breath, but the words were swallowed by the hum of the furnace. Later that night, when the desert wind began to howl against the metal walls, Cole sat by the window, watching the horizon where her pod still smoked faintly in the dark. He'd seen too many ruins, too many bodies left to the dust, and yet this one survivor had found her way to his doorstep. It felt like the universe had forced him into a choice he'd been avoiding for years, to open the door again or keep living like a shadow. Behind him, Arinya shifted in her sleep, murmuring something in her own language. The sound was soft, almost like a lullaby. He turned slightly, watching her face relax for the first time since he'd found her. In that moment, she didn't look alien at all. She looked lost the way he had once been. He poured himself a drink, the old burn of whiskey grounding him. He told himself he'd take her to the outpost in the morning, let the medics deal with her. But deep down, he already knew he wouldn't. When dawn crept through the cracks of the window, Cole was still awake. He rose quietly and walked over to her cot. The first light touched her face, catching the faint shimmer of her skin. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze again. Human, she whispered. Yeah? Thank you for stepping forward. He didn't answer. He just nodded once, the smallest of gestures. But for the first time in years, it felt like the beginning of something he couldn't name, something that might finally make him feel human again. The mornings on the desert frontier always began the same. Wind hissing through the cracks, the pale light crawling over the horizon like a ghost returning home. But this morning, Cole noticed something that didn't belong. A quiet hum, soft and melodic, coming from the small cot near the fire. Arinya was awake. She sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, her silver hair tangled and glowing faintly against her blue skin. The faint light traced the thin lines of energy that pulsed under her skin like living veins of starlight. Cole poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it carefully, studying the shape of his hand, as if every movement of a human fascinated her. You work with soil, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. But this world has almost none left alive. He gave a quiet grunt, half amusement, half exhaustion. It's the only work I know. She sipped the water, eyes flicking around the small cabin again, landing on the photograph sitting near the shelf. It showed a woman with warm eyes holding a small creature, half dog, half rusted machine. Arinya pointed. Your mate? Cole froze for a moment. Was, he said finally, a long time ago. The alien lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. He shrugged it off and busied himself with the small fire. You should eat something. Can you handle our food? She hesitated. If it's made from life, I can. He sliced some dried fruit and pressed it into her hand. She held it up to her lips, tasting it like a stranger touching fire for the first time. Sweet, she murmured, like the air before rain. Cole studied her quietly. Everything she said carried a strange poetry, like her tongue wasn't built for this language, but somehow made it more beautiful. For the next few days, she stayed in his care. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words lingered long after she'd fallen silent. She asked about everything, the cattle, the weather drones, the scar on his jaw. Once she touched it lightly without asking, her fingers cool and trembling. Pain, she whispered, means you were brave. He turned away, pretending not to hear. At night, when the wind screamed outside and the stars cut through the clouds, she would hum softly to herself. It was never a full song, just fragments of something mournful and ancient. Cole would lie awake listening, pretending he wasn't moved by it, though it reached into the hollow spaces of his chest where no sound had lived in years. One evening, he stepped into the room carrying a repaired air filter and found her standing by the window, staring out at the endless dunes. Her reflection shimmered against the glass. "You're healing fast," he said. She turned her head slightly, eyes reflecting the orange light of the sunset. "My body adapts, but the air still burns my lungs. I'll need time." "You've got time," he muttered, setting the device down. She tilted her head. "You speak as if you don't believe in it." He almost smiled. "Around here, time's just another thing that leaves you behind." There was quiet again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. The air between them felt different, denser somehow, charged with things neither dared to name. Later that night, as Cole worked in the barn, patching a broken water pipe, he heard footsteps behind him. Arinya stood in the doorway, her thin silhouette lit by the faint blue glow of her skin. She was holding one of his coats, clumsy in her human movements, yet somehow graceful. "You left this," she said softly. He took it from her, nodding. "You should stay inside. The air's not clean yet." She stepped closer, ignoring the warning. "I don't like the silence," she confessed. "It feels like it's watching me." He glanced at her, confused. "Watching you?" She looked up, eyes shining in the dim light. "Where I come from, silence only happens after death. Here, you live inside it." Her words hit him deeper than he expected. He stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're not wrong." When she returned inside, he stayed there for a while, staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like weight. A few nights later, he woke to the sound of engines. Harsh lights cut through the cracks of the window. Hover trucks, patrols from the nearby garrison. Cole's gut twisted. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. The wind carried faint voices. Thermal scan picked up energy near here. Could be a leftover drone or a survivor. Cole cursed under his breath. He went back inside. Arinya had already woken. Her eyes were wide with fear, her breath short. "They'll kill me," she whispered. "Not if they don't see you," he said, grabbing her arm and leading her through the narrow corridor to the old trapdoor beneath the barn. He lifted the hatch, revealing a small compartment lined with old storage containers. "Get in. Don't move until I come back." She hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. The boots were getting closer. He met her gaze and said lowly, "Because someone has to." She slid down into the dark, eyes never leaving his until the hatch closed above her. Cole stepped out just as the soldiers arrived. Their leader, a man with a scarred face and a scanner in hand, nodded curtly. "Evening, Arden. You seen any debris fall out this way?" "Nothing worth salvaging," Cole said evenly. The man smirked. "That's funny. Sensors said there was heat from a crash site 2 clicks north. Thought maybe some alien trash wandered near your land." Cole's grip tightened on his rifle. "You think I'd let one of them near my property?" The officer studied him for a long moment, then finally spat into the dust. "Keep your eyes open, rancher. If you find anything breathing blue, report it. Command's paying triple for live captures." When they left, the silence returned, this time sharper than ever. Cole stood still for a long while before going back to the barn. He opened the hatch. Arinya was curled beneath the metal floor, trembling but alive. "They're gone," he said softly. She looked up at him, tears glinting in her eyes. "You risked everything." He crouched down beside her, his voice rough. "You're not the first thing I've risked for." Her hand found his, uncertain but real. The touch startled him. It was warm, fragile, and trembling. That night, they didn't speak. She sat near the fire, wrapped in one of his blankets, and he repaired the damaged circuits from her pod. Outside, the wind screamed again, but inside the small cabin, the silence began to change. It wasn't watching anymore. It was listening. Arinya hummed quietly while he worked. The song was soft, half-human now, as if she was learning how to turn her grief into something the world could understand. Cole didn't look up, but his hands slowed with every note. When the melody faded, she said quietly, "I was taught humans only destroy what they touch." He glanced at her. "You still believe that?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Not anymore." Cole didn't reply, but later when he went to check the perimeter, he realized his chest didn't feel so heavy anymore. The ranch was still silent, the desert still endless, but there was something different in the air. Something alive, something fragile, something worth protecting. Inside the cabin, Arinya sat by the window, staring out at the pale moon. She whispered to herself words he couldn't hear, words from a world long gone. And for the first time since the crash, she didn't feel like she was dying. She felt like she was beginning to live. The days that followed blurred into a fragile rhythm of survival and silence. Cole repaired what was left of her pod while Arinya tended to the few living cattle that roamed near the ranch, her strange, luminous hands soothing even the skittish ones. The desert no longer felt empty. The sound of her voice filled it, soft questions, short laughter, moments that broke the heaviness inside him piece by piece. But peace never lasts on the frontier. One evening, while Cole worked in the barn, the faint static hum of a radio filled the air. He froze. No human channel had used that frequency since the ceasefire years ago. Arinya came running, her eyes wide. "That's my people's code," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a distress signal." Cole turned the dial, letting the garbled message spill through the speaker. Among the crackle, a few words became clear. "Infection spreading, human settlements failing. The cure must not die with us." Arinya's face drained of color. "It's begun," she whispered. "The war didn't end, Cole." It only changed shape. He stared at her, his pulse tightening. "What are you talking about?" "The humans released a virus, something to keep us from returning. But it mutated. Now it kills both species. My ship carried data that could stop it." She pressed a trembling hand against her chest, where faint lines of light flickered beneath her skin. "It's still inside me. The coordinates, the cure code, it's written into my blood." Cole stepped back, trying to process the words. "You're saying if you die, then it dies too." He dragged a hand over his face. "God damn it." She looked at him with quiet desperation. "You asked why I fell here." "I didn't. I was shot down. Someone didn't want peace." He walked to the window, staring out at the wasteland. A hot wind blew sand against the glass like claws. "You can't send it alone. They'll track the signal." "I know," she said. "I'll need a power source strong enough to reach orbit." "Something your world still guards." He turned, his eyes dark. "The garrison's transmitter tower." Arinya nodded. "If I can reach it before the next rotation, I can send the cure code to both fleets." It could end everything. Cole's jaw tightened. "Or start another war." She stepped closer, her voice low and pleading. "If we do nothing, everyone does. You, me, the child you once dreamed of, the woman you lost. This world turns to dust, and the silence wins." Her words cut deep. He had never told her about his wife's death, about the stillbirth that had hollowed him out before the war even began. Yet somehow she knew. Maybe she could read pain like others read language. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "We'll go tonight." The desert swallowed them whole as they rode across it. Cole drove the old transport rig while Arinya sat beside him, the faint light from her skin painting the dark interior in a soft blue glow. She stared at the stars through the cracked windshield. "You call them stars," she said. "We call them witnesses. Every soul that ever lived burns there." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Then there's a lot of watching tonight." When they reached the ridge overlooking the garrison, the world below flickered with harsh lights and movement. Soldiers, drones, the metallic skeleton of the tower cutting into the sky. Cole parked the rig behind a dune and turned off the engine. "You sure about this?" She met his gaze. "If I fail, you destroy me. Don't let them take what's inside." He gritted his teeth. "I won't have to." They crept through the shadows, moving between old vehicles and rusted fences. Arinya moved like flowing water, her steps silent, her eyes scanning the patterns of light. When they reached the tower base, she placed her hand on the console. The lines under her skin glowed brighter, syncing with the machine. "I can override it," she whispered. "Make it fast," Cole muttered, watching the perimeter. The hum of the tower rose, a vibration that made his bones ache. Then came the shout. "There! Stop them!" Floodlights snapped on, cutting through the dark. Soldiers poured out from the barracks, rifles raised. Cole fired first, the crack of his gun echoing across the desert. Arinya flinched but didn't stop. The air smelled of plasma and dust. A bullet grazed Cole's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He grunted, firing back, dropping another figure in the sand. "Almost there!" she cried, her voice breaking with strain. Sparks leapt from the console as her blood interfaced with the transmitter. Her skin glowed brighter, veins pulsing like circuits. Cole turned to cover her when another shot rang out, and he stumbled forward. He looked down, blood spreading across his shirt. Arinya screamed his name and ran to him, catching him before he hit the ground. He tried to speak, but only dust came out. She pressed her hands against the wound. Her light dimmed as she poured energy into him. "No, don't," he rasped. "Finish the signal." "I can't lose you," she whispered, tears tracing bright paths down her cheeks. "You already found me," he managed, his voice faint. "That's enough." She looked back at the tower where the screen flickered violently. With a trembling cry, she reached up and pressed her glowing hand against it. The code spilled from her blood into the machine, lines of alien script racing across the metal. The tower roared to life, shooting a beam of pure white light into the sky. Every drone froze. Every soldier stopped firing. For a moment, even the desert wind held its breath. When the light faded, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was vast, alive. Arinya fell beside him, her body flickering like a dying flame. "It's done," she whispered. "The cure. It's gone to the stars." Cole's vision blurred. He touched her cheek weakly. "You did it, Blue Girl." She smiled faintly, pressing her forehead to his. "You're more human than any I've met." He breathed out a broken laugh. "Guess that makes you more alive than you think." She cradled his head, rocking him gently as the dawn began to rise. Around them, the desert glowed in shades of red and gold. The soldiers had vanished into the dunes, or maybe they were just ghosts now. Cole's breath slowed. "If I don't wake up—" "You will," she said fiercely. "You have to." He tried to smile. "You talk like you believe it." "I do," she whispered, "because I believe in you." Then the light in her veins flared one last time and she bent over him, letting a single tear fall onto his chest. It glowed briefly, then sank into his skin like a tiny sun. His eyes closed, the pain ebbing, replaced by warmth. Arinya held him until his breathing steadied, then looked to the horizon where the beam had touched the sky. A faint shimmer lingered there, spreading outward like ripples through eternity. Somewhere up there, life had just begun again. When the sun rose fully, Cole lay unconscious, his chest rising slowly. Arinya touched his hand, her expression unreadable. "You saved me first," she said softly. "Now I've saved you." She stood, her figure small against the endless expanse of the awakening world. The tower was silent, its purpose complete. Her ship was gone, her mission fulfilled, but something far more fragile had taken root in her chest, something she didn't know how to name. She looked once more at the man who had stepped forward when everyone else turned away, and a single word escaped her lips, a whisper carried by the wind. "Live." Then she turned toward the distant horizon where the light still trembled and walked into it. He tried to sit up, but pain surged through his side. His shirt was clean, bandaged. The smell of herbs filled the room, sharp and earthy. Someone had cared for him. On the table nearby, a small pendant lay glowing faintly blue, pulsing like a heartbeat. Arinya. The name burned through his chest. He swung his legs to the floor, ignoring the pain, and looked around. The cabin was silent. Dust drifted through the sunlight. Her cot was empty. Outside, the desert shimmered under the late morning heat, endless and indifferent. He stepped out into the wind, scanning the horizon until his throat tightened. There was no trace of her, only the faint imprint of small feet in the sand, already fading. For days, Cole searched. He rode across the ridges, checked the crash site, called her name into the night. Nothing answered but the wind. The tower they'd activated was a skeleton now, scorched black and silent. The war was over, the plague halted, and no one came to collect the dead. The world had survived, but it felt emptier than ever. Weeks passed. He went back to the ranch because he had nowhere else to go. Life returned to a slow crawl of repairs, feeding cattle and talking to ghosts. Sometimes he would catch himself looking toward the door, expecting her soft voice to fill the silence. Other times he'd wake at night to that faint humming sound, the memory of her songs bleeding through his dreams. The planet began to heal. Rains fell for the first time in years, turning the dunes darker, heavier, alive. The government broadcast spoke of peace, of reconstruction, of humans and the surviving alien colonies sharing knowledge to rebuild what had been lost. Cole didn't care about politics. He cared about the quiet promise she'd made with her eyes the last time he saw her. You will live, he did. Barely. One afternoon, as he repaired a water pump near the corral, a strange shape broke the sky. A ship, sleek, silver, humming softly. He shielded his eyes, heart thudding. It wasn't military. It moved with grace, not power. The craft descended slowly, its landing jets stirring waves of dust around the ranch. Cole stepped back, hand on his rifle, half ready, half afraid to believe what hope was whispering. The hatch opened. She stood there, framed by the sunlight. No armor, no mask, no fear. Her blue skin shimmered softly beneath a loose jacket the color of sand, and her silver hair caught the wind like threads of light. But something was different. Her breathing was steady, her eyes clear. She stepped down barefoot, her feet touching the desert as if it no longer hurt her. Orinya, he breathed, his voice cracking from disbelief. She smiled slow and gentle, like dawn. This time I came not to survive, she said, her voice trembling with warmth, but to live. He didn't move at first. He just stared at her, the image too fragile to trust. When he finally stepped forward, it was the same way he had on that first day. One cautious step, full of everything he didn't know how to say. She closed the distance herself, her hands reaching up to touch his face. The contact sent a shiver through him, a memory of pain and fire and hope all at once. You shouldn't be here, he murmured. I should, she said softly. The air doesn't burn anymore. Your world changed, our worlds changed. The cure worked. Humans breathe my skies now. My people breathe yours. He looked at her closely, searching for the exhaustion, the fragility that had once haunted her. But there was none. She looked alive, more human than he remembered. I thought I lost you. I had to leave, she whispered. They found me after the signal. They took me to orbit to heal. I wanted to return sooner, but I needed to be certain you were safe. He almost laughed, shaking his head. You saved me twice, Blue Girl. She tilted her head, that old curious gesture still the same. And you saved me first. I think we're even. He exhaled shakily, and for the first time in years, his smile wasn't bitter. No, he said, not even close. They stood in the quiet for a while, the sun low and red, painting the land in copper light. Orinya looked around at the ranch, the fences, the machines, the scars of years alone. You kept it alive, she said softly. It's all I know how to do. Her eyes softened. Maybe now you can learn something else. Inside the cabin, she placed her pendant on the table. The glow had dimmed, its power spent. It's part of the signal's memory, she explained. What we did is recorded in every transmission that saved a life. You and I, we became the story they tell their children now. The human who stepped forward when the universe turned away, he blinked slowly, swallowing hard, and the alien who taught him how to live again. She smiled. That too. As days turned into weeks, she stayed. The ranch no longer felt like a grave. One night they sat by the fire. The stars outside burned clearer than he'd ever seen. She was humming again, an old tune from her world. Cole leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the sound fill the silence that had once suffocated him. You ever think about going back? He asked quietly. Orinya looked at the flames, her expression thoughtful. Home isn't a place, she said. It's where you're allowed to exist without apology. He turned his head toward her, catching the faint smile tugging at her lips. Then I guess you found yours. She met his gaze. No, Cole. We found ours. He reached for her hand, rough skin against smooth human warmth against alien light. The touch was steady, real. No storm, no crash, no war in the sky could erase it now. Rumors spread eventually, stories of the rancher and the alien girl who lived beyond the dunes. Some said they were ghosts from the old war. Others said they were a proof that peace was possible. Cole never cared what the townsfolk whispered. He had stopped living for other people a long time ago. Seasons changed. The sky cleared, and for the first time, rain fell not as acid but as water. The ground turned dark and soft. Grass began to grow where the sand had ruled. Arinya stood in it one morning barefoot, eyes closed, her arms open to the sky as the drops slid over her skin. Cole watched her from the porch, that quiet awe returning, the same awe that had started everything. She turned, smiling at him through the rain. "You once said time leaves you behind," she called out. "But maybe it was waiting for us." He laughed softly and walked toward her, the rain soaking through his shirt, the earth cool beneath his boots. When he reached her, she reached up, touching his face with wet fingers. "You were never meant to live alone," she whispered. He kissed her then, slow, hesitant, like a man touching sunlight for the first time. The world didn't shatter, it simply exhaled. When the storm cleared, the horizon burned gold. Cole glanced at her and said quietly, "You once begged me for a single night to survive." Arinya smiled, the cone that reached her eyes. "And now?" He took her hand again. "Now you have all my days." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. The desert that had once been nothing but dust now glowed with the color of life returning. For the first time since the war, the wind carried no echoes of fear, only the sound of laughter, human and alien, rising together with the dawn.